Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Shred's Takes. I'm your host, Mike Shredder. I'm joined by fellow Ridgewood High School alum and a friend from high school, Hunter Strafaci. He's done incredible work now, being a sports broadcaster down at Penn State Brandywine as well as Arcadia. I'm going to clip a bunch of his stuff into the description. But Hunter, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much for reaching out, and I'm glad we're doing this.
Hey man, thanks for having me. Big fan of the show.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. We'll see if you are afterwards. All jokes aside, let's get to the start of it, which is for those who don't know, right? You and I went to Ridgewood High School. You decided to go to Syracuse, and then you went to Penn State Brandywine. You decided, hey, I want to be a sports broadcaster, right? I want to get into the world of doing that. Where did that passion stem from? What got you intrigued by the idea of trying to become a play-by-play color commentary, sports reporter type thing in the sports world?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I didn't really know until the last semester of school. Penn State requires you to have an internship if you are a communications major, which I was. And my professor got wind that I was having trouble finding one, and she directed me towards the athletics department. They had a couple internships available. There was one to do color commentary, which is like the co-commentator, second voice on the broadcast. Got the internship, and I guess I did well enough for them to hire me after, and now I do the play-by-play there. I guess I got the idea. I mean, I've always been passionate about sports. I'm a huge soccer guy. When I was growing up, and even now, I hardly ever miss a game on the weekends. And a big part of it for me is always listening to the way the guys talk, the unique spin they have on the game, and how they paint a picture and make it a more interesting product.
So let's talk a little bit about that. With the idea of you playing soccer, also for a good part of your life, right? And then obviously, you start covering other sports. How did you develop your own style? Because you're going into an internship, as we talked about, where you're trusted to be that voice, but you can't just go in and be robotic. You're trying to create your own portfolio and your own uniqueness, so to speak, right? Your own value prop. Can you talk a little bit about just kind of how you develop your own unique voice and your preparation for becoming someone that now is trusted to do a lot of games and be able to even work at like Arcadia as well?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple months, maybe even 6 months, you're really just trying to imitate what you've heard throughout your life in terms of professional broadcasts. And then after that, once you start to mesh everything together, you start to get to a place where you have your own unique spin. So a lot of it is, of course, pregame research and learning about the players and coming prepared with a whole sheet on everything you need to know throughout the broadcast. And then another big part of it is, when you're watching these games now on the TV, like now that I'm a professional broadcaster, you're hearing you're hearing the game in a different way. You're picking up things from every single sport. Oh, I like how this guy said that. Oh, I like how she said this. And yeah, you're just putting it all together pretty much.
So a big thing too is, we'll talk a little bit maybe about like, the different ways you attack just like the game itself. But a big thing with broadcasting now, what gets intriguing, I guess, at least in my opinion, is the idea of like the stories beyond just what they do statistically, right? Like what do they do outside of, sport with maybe academic life, some like, some charity they're involved in, clubs they're involved with, other initiatives. What like when you're researching, how big are those type of stories, the human interest stories people call them, to helping create a more seamless and more interesting broadcast for you?
Yeah, those are huge because, you could talk about stats the entire game, but you're going to get repetitive and it's going to become boring. It's huge for freshmen. So if someone makes their debut, the human side of the way they got there is the biggest thing to because you don't have anything to go off for them in terms of stats at the school. Now you could talk a little bit about how they did in high school, but it's definitely cool to add, like you were saying, volunteer stuff, academic stuff, all that. So before the season starts, I get the whole roster from the sports information director at the school, and I just do a deep dive in front of the computer and just, look up their name with their high school, try to get as much as possible that's online in like a sporting or academic context. So, I'm not diving on people's social or anything. But if there's an article written about maybe they were in the band program, maybe they volunteered at a soup kitchen or something. That's something that I'll always talk about on the broadcast. And it's great when there's downtime in the game. So if there's a goal kick for soccer, for example, that's a perfect opportunity for me to bring a different dimension to the broadcast and talk about something that isn't related to the game.
So when you first started, right? I'm not saying you're green, but for example, you're getting started, right? You're trying to, as we talked about, develop your voice. How do you think you've progressed? Like how has your style maybe changed? How has your attention to preparation or detail maybe changed over the course of now being now a professional broadcaster versus an intern broadcaster when you first started? How has it changed for you?
Well, I was definitely green. My first couple games, they weren't terrible, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And then after those games, I realized, okay, I gotta come with notes. I can't just sit here. It's not as simple as just sitting here and talking about the game. I have to be prepared. And then in terms of developing my voice, I was a lot shyer on the broadcast. I was leaving a lot more dead air on the broadcast. And it's gotten to the point where I'm comfortable enough to fill time when needed, to add, levity when required, and to develop a more serious tone when the game is close, for example.
So another thing I want to kind of jump into is not just the broadcasting portion of it, but also the post game sideline content you've done, which is a little, as you and I both know, it's very different than just broadcasting for 2 hours, right? You have to be very quick to the point. You got to be able to engage athletes and with good questions. First of all, talk about how you got started with that, and talk about just kind of your ability, I would say, to, because at least when I flip some stuff in, like you've been able to engage, those athletes very well, and at least be able to, get it like a D3 school very much like those athletes excited about an interview. Can you talk about just like how that got introduced to you, and then also the ability to try and engage athletes to actually want to answer questions and be able to give, honest answers and, bring some excitement to their program?
Sure. Well, when I started doing play-by-play, it was expected of me to do post-game interviews if we won a game or if there was a good result, maybe a draw for soccer. So yeah, again, I kind of just jumped into it. My first interview was awkward and weird, and but now it's come to the point where, first of all, before the season, I'll try to greet all the athletes with a handshake, introduce myself, build a little rapport with them. It's something that I'm still working on, but it's definitely helpful when the interview comes around. I always try to structure the interview in the same way, like you were saying, short form is always best, especially for social media, for exposure for the school and for the athlete. So I try to keep it a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And then I always structure it past, present, future in terms of questions. I tend to ask 3 questions, maybe 4 or 5, depending on the game. But past, I mean, talk about the performance in the match that just ended. Present, we're talking about how for example, is like how everyone's getting along. If it's the first game of the season, how the rookies are betting into the team. And then present, I'll talk about, what are you going to take from this game moving forward, sort of deal. And then it's actually great. I mean, a lot of our athletes are very excited to do the interviews, and they come ready to bring it, ready to get their story out there. I mean, what I'm doing at Penn State Brandywine is still pretty new. No one was really, I mean, we had it before me, but it wasn't as consistent and it wasn't at every single game. And so the athletes they really like it. They like to send it to their families. They like to send it to their friends. Now, some of our shyer athletes want to see the questions before I do the interview, which is totally fine. I mean, I understand that. The best interviews tend to be when they just say what comes to mind right off the dome without any preparation, because then you're really saying what you feel without any second guessing. And it's my responsibility as an interviewer to put on a good interview. It's not at all up to the athlete, or the pressure's on me. If they give an answer that isn't great for information or for the social media, then that's my problem because I didn't ask them a good enough question.
So another thing too is just kind of building the tape, right? You're working with D3 sports, right? Which is different than, going to Division 1 school where, you're getting those high leverage NIL athletes, right? You're covering obviously very good athletes at Penn State Brandywine, but it's a bit of like a a niche audience, right? It's in a, it's in a small town in Pennsylvania. Like it's just different, right? But how do you think that's also been able to allow you to blossom or just like give you amazing exposure to this, like kind of working more in a emerging niche markets for your broadcast career? How do you think that's helped you as opposed to, just going into like a New York market, for example?
Yeah, that's a great point, honestly. It's a small program, as you're saying, it's emerging, so it's given me so much opportunity to actually be the lead broadcaster at the school. I mean, I started my education at Syracuse, which is a great place to do uh, broadcasting, any type of journalism, but it's so competitive, and I know for sure I wouldn't have had the opportunity there to really build a portfolio, call as many games as I have, do as many interviews as I have if I wasn't at a smaller program like Penn State Brandywine. And it's a great program in terms of the tightness of everybody. Everybody's close, everybody knows each other, and it's also moving in the right direction. I mean, we just got moved up to a new conference this season. We're playing in the NCAA for the first season here. And, for that reason, it's another layer of, okay, they're building, I'm building, we're all helping each other, and it's all mutual gains.
So for you, kind of looking forward, right? Obviously, you're focused on doing the best job here, but you know, I read an article recently. It was talking about alumni and it was talking about you and kind of the idea of like you, I think there was a quote that you're talking about, like, hey, I want to be, the best sports broadcaster I can be, and I want to be able to really leave a great mark. Like that was, and I'm paraphrasing it, but that's essentially like kind of what you were saying. Can you talk about like the idea of just like leaving up like a positive mark, regardless? Like I'm sure you're going to continue to build the career and be super successful at this. But can you talk about this like when you do a broadcast, leaving a positive mark? Like, how do you want to do that? How do you want to continue to evolve to do that? Because, and make people be able to have some sort of relatability and feel like they're in the broadcast with you and don't feel like they're separate. Like, how do you leave that positive mark and that relatability with your broadcast?
Sure. So for me, that leaving a legacy sort of thing is really important to me, and that's even at the game by game level. So, after every game, I always watch it. I want to reflect, see if I did a good job, and then to bring people with me is to be, I feel, a consistent voice. The families turn on the broadcast. It's me every time. And then on the other side of things, trying to bring up new commentators for the program because maybe one day, I mean probably one day I may not be there. And excuse me. And we have a great color guy who's doing it with me. We have a club now for sports broadcasting. And I'm sure that, I feel it's my responsibility to make sure that I leave the program in a better place than where I found it, especially with the on-screen graphics, the production side of things. That's something that I've learned how to do on my own time. That's something that I definitely will teach somebody before I leave.
Can you talk a little bit? I just wanted to highlight that for a second, kind of just being like doing a lot of different things with the broadcast. And I think this is an advantage of working at I'm not gonna say smaller program, but like an emerging sports broadcasting program, is the idea that you get to learn everything, right? You have to learn everything. You got to be able to do production, do graphics, be able to make sure that the video and the camera, does a decent enough job, right? Like you're kind of involved with all of that. How do you think that's helped you develop your ability to lead? Like you trying to talk about like helping others and grooming them to be successful. How do you think, having all those different responsibilities and handling multiple projects has helped you with leadership and your confidence in your ability to lead and, help develop the future generation of broadcasters at Penn State Brandywine, for example?
So yeah, I'm responsible for all the aspects of the broadcast. I don't move the camera around, but of course that's part of it. So I do the production end, which is done through this program called Blue Frame Production Truck, which is owned by Huddle. And again, it's all preparation. So I prepare the graphics and all that stuff before the game, and then at the game, I'm doing the live play-by-play, and then also working what the viewer sees on the screen, which is it's tough, but it's also kind of a good thing because if I'm talking about something, I can bring it up on the screen and I don't need to, tap somebody or communicate somehow non-verbally, like, hey, I want to talk about this. We don't have to have a game plan beforehand. Um, and then you remind me what the end of that question was, Mike.
Yeah, so yeah, it's all good. So when you're doing all that, right? Like obviously, if are taking on a lot of different projects, you're in a position hopefully to be able, like as you mentioned a couple minutes, or I guess a minute or two ago, the idea about leading and grooming the future generation. How do you think those ability to handle multiple tasks has made you more confident in your ability to do that, as opposed to if you didn't do all that and having to develop that on the fly? Like, can you talk about like how do you feel like more confident be saying, okay, I can teach this, it's not hard, and the programs, like as you mentioned before, it's going to be better off eventually if you move on than when you first started.
Sure. Yeah, I got you now. Yeah, it's definitely been something that I proved to myself, okay, I can run the show sort of deal. And then, going forward, I'm so confident in my ability to actually do the production side of things that I know for sure I could sit down with somebody in a couple hours and run through every single thing that we do. And I could also leave templates and things that are available for download later that anybody can use in any area for any sport, even for like public address stuff for the school. If we do a Hall of Fame ceremony that we stream, I could teach someone how to do the, make it more engaging because that's the whole thing. It's all for the viewer. Obviously, it looks great for us who are on the inside, but we want to do is enhance the product for the people at home.
Engaging content is such a big thing we hear, at least in our age group, right? It's like the idea, how do you engage Gen Z? That's like the big question people like to ask, right? And it's something
Right.
I'm trying to figure out myself when I've been creating content. I'm sure you have been trying to too, right? Obviously, you mentioned you're trying to create content for everybody with the broadcast, but there's obviously the social media component, which is very important to the short clips, to the student body, right? Like being able to expose the student body to, hey, here's what the athletes are, right? When you go into that, right, you kind of talk about like the questions you ask are important, but when you're thinking about how to create engaging content overall for like a younger generation audience, not just on the broadcast, but for like a social media platform, what goes into that for you? And like, how have you developed that where you can be like, all right, this is going to be engaging enough where people are actually going to be excited to listen and watch this on social media and, learn more about the athletes.
For sure. So, interviews aside, I do this series with our athletes called How Hard Could It Be? So, it's like an average Joe trying the sport sort of short form content. So, I've done a soccer video, I did a softball video, baseball videos coming out soon. And, the first 10 seconds of that video, it has to grab the attention because otherwise people are just going to swipe right through it. So if I can get the concept of the video out of the way quickly, maybe with some humor or something engaging. For example, my softball video that I did, we did like a old Western style 10 paces high noon shootout fake, of course, not real, but sort of thing in the beginning where, close up on the eyes, close up on the hands, the Western music in the background, get people excited. Oh, what's this? What's this going to be about? And then I take the at bat, and obviously, I don't do well. I'm not an athlete. I'm the commentator. So yeah, it's just shoehorning in the content in the end.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm sure like if many people went up to that it would probably be hard for them too when you're going against.
Yeah.
So, last question is, what would be, people have obviously heard other like I guess storytellers on this pod, but like I haven't had many broadcasters, I would say on. Can you talk a little bit about just your advice to people that are looking to get into broadcasting or just kind of create their own brand and their own personal identity? I think that's such an important question for people, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whether it's be a lawyer or a doctor. Ultimately that's an important question I ask on this pod is like, how do you build your personal brand and how do you like what's your advice for that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
For sure. So in my specific area, and then I'll get to the broader advice, but in my area, you got to realize that words are almost like currency. So every single thing that I'm saying is reaching a family member, a friend, maybe the athlete afterwards. It's reflecting on me as well. So I got to be very specific with the words that I use and how you deliver them. Now, for the broader question, I'd say that to build a brand, you got to do a lot of work on your own time. Nobody is going to just give you the chance with no experience to climb the mountain per se. So what I did a lot of is like we've talked about the preparation work that I do at home. I have to do it. I really don't have a choice because that builds my brand. I want to be every single time I'm on air, I want it to be as good as possible. And that you can definitely extrapolate to any area, any profession. What you do on the clock is one thing, but what you do at home, what you bring to the time on the clock is a whole different thing. And then I'd also add that when you are, working on something that is very competitive like that, you have to spot where you can improve certain things. So like I said, when I started at Penn State Brandywine, we had a broadcast. We had a great broadcaster, but he wasn't coming to every game and there was no on-screen stuff. So when I started, I was like, okay, how can I take it to another level? And yeah, I mean, just by being there every day, by being the best you can, and by incorporating different things, that's pretty much how you do it.
I think that's great. I love the words are like currency quote. That's definitely something I think I might have to like throw into the post or throw it into a blog I write. Like
Thanks, man.
that's such a powerful quote 'cause it's true, right? I mean, obviously not just with the brand stuff, but like the things that you're putting out, right? Like that's stuff that people are going to be absorbing and people are going to see value in. And that's such a unique quote. I actually haven't heard that, and I really like that quote. But first of all, I want to say thank you so much for coming on. And obviously, for those who don't know, like Hunter and I were very good. We're close friends in high school. It's great to see the fact that you've really grown yourself as a broadcaster. Like it's great to look at all your work and the stuff you've done. And I'm glad you're able to, make time to come on the pod, talk about it. And, I obviously really appreciate it. I love hearing these type of stories. And I'm sure you're going to do great stuff in this and look forward to hearing more about your success and seeing more of your success going forward.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. But likewise, I really like what you've been doing with the podcast. I watched the show. I watched the great episode with Mr. Troy, great episode with Greg Skorik, two Ridgewood legends. So yeah, same thing, man. You're going places.
Yeah, for those who were just listening, my guest was Hunter Strafaci, Ridgewood native, and now play-by-play and color commentator for Penn State Brandywine and Arcadia University, both D3 schools. And he's doing great stuff over there, really building the broadcast and doing a great job just in terms of just the voice he's bringing to D3 college sports. So, Hunter, thank you so much. And for those listening, it's another episode of Stretch Takes. Check out more episodes on my social media page and the YouTube page. And we look forward to seeing you more down the road on future episodes. Thanks.